exactly 1 week, on January 10th, the Supreme Court will hear arguments on whether the law forcing TikTok's sale or ban is constitutional. Here with what we can expect from the Supreme Court is our very own Alexis Keenan. Alexis, lots to talk about when it comes to the potential TikTok ban. What do we need to know heading into next week?
Yeah, so what the Supreme Court is going to address is the question of whether the First Amendment's speech protections make this law unconstitutional as applied to TikTok, the Chinese company, as well as TikTok users. There's two parties in this case. The cases are being heard together, and they have similar arguments, but there are differences there as well. So the court is going to hear arguments on Friday, so 1 week from today, and they're going to hear from the Justice Department, as well as TikTok and those users. And it's going to be arguments for and against the government's claim that national security justifies this law. Now, if you remember, TikTok had asked the court to pause enforcement of the law, which is set to go into effect the day before Trump is sworn into office for a second term. On January 19th is the date that the law is effective, so 1 day before there. But instead of doing that injunction for TikTok, the Supreme Court instead tabled that request and decided to hold this hearing. Now, the options for the court at this point then are to either hold this law constitutional as to these two parties or unconstitutional. But if they do find that it is constitutional, they really don't have, the Supreme Court does not have really then the power to pause the law from going into effect.
So then that leads perfectly to our next question for you. What power does incoming President Trump have then?
Yeah, so it's interesting. He filed a brief in the Supreme Court, which is really unusual for a president who's not been sworn in yet, right? He doesn't really have the standing necessarily. He's not really a party situated where the court would definitely consider and let him weigh in as a party, like we would call it standing, the situated in, to be able to bring that into the court. So while he did that, they may or may not consider it. They don't have to. Trump, of course, promised, though, that he would try to save TikTok. So this is all, I guess, part of that. He wants to negotiate a solution. He wants time to do that. But also he could direct the U.S. Attorney General to not enforce the law. But you have to consider that the law makes it illegal for companies like Apple and Google to carry it and distribute the app. So they don't want to necessarily be breaking the law. So can't really bank on that.
It's expensive for them, right? Depending on the downloads. So that's, yeah.
Sure, absolutely. And I think at the base, though, they're not going to want to be breaking the law because they don't want to be accountable for it later. Also, the president, once he is sworn into office, could try to persuade Congress to amend it and make it look different than it looks today, because Congress is not very likely to just overturn a law that they just passed with overwhelming bipartisan support. Also, you could claim that Trump could. There's this nuance in the law where the president is the one tasked with certifying whether the company has been divested. Mm-hmm. So whether it has or has not been, there are legal experts who say, well, Trump might try to say it's been divested when it really hasn't. Again, probably a bit of a stretch, but certainly so many different companies at play here that could be impacted. You have the social media platforms, you have Meta, you have X, you have Truth Social even, Trump's Truth Social, all in the mix here fighting for advertising dollars that possibly are now flowing to TikTok that if this ban goes into effect might not be going in that direction.
All right, Alexis, thanks so much for breaking that down for us. Really appreciate it.